there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 3 in the Weeds, Episode 9, the 4 agendas in sales, the 1 deceptive one that manipulates your buyer, the 2 selfish ones that ultimately hurt your buyer, and the 1 golden one that ultimately helps your buyer and your conversion in the process. My name is Becc. I'm going to be your guide for this session. If you do me a favor before we jump in, this session is extremely dense and has a lot of slides to it to support. So if you do me a favor, it's for free. Go to flipthescript.co. On the left-hand side, click Free Sales Training Hub in Season 3, and then download the deck for Episode 9. All you'll have to do is put in your email. And once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump into the content. So let's jump in. So here is the agenda for today. You're going to see the word agenda so much today, but there's essentially 4 agendas that we're going to cover. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, 3 of them we want to avoid while selling, and 1 of them we always want to have while selling. So we're going to call this, for nomenclature's sake, the golden agenda. And I'm not going to tease out which one it is, but for this golden agenda, we're going to finish off with what you need to know and what you need to have for the golden agenda to basically execute it well. And then the 11 ways to execute this golden agenda. So I am very excited about this session. So let's get going. So agenda number 1, and this is going to be a deceptive agenda. So the first and most common agenda that I see people have while selling is having the agenda to sell them. And part of the way that they do this is they pretend to have no agenda. So hear me out. You'll hear a lot of different characteristics of this being, I want to be more human while I'm selling. I want to have empathy for my buyer while I'm selling. I just want to be a person with them while I'm selling. But really, net, even if you're trying to act more human, but you still have the agenda of closing them, it makes it worse than just admitting that you're trying to close them. So this is going to be the most manipulative agenda. And it's probably the one that, if I'm candid, pisses me off the most. Because the goal is still for the seller to sell products, the most products, at the highest ticket item. But the characteristic of it is they pretend to have no agenda, to be detached from the outcome, to just be a human who cares about them. But deep down, their agenda is, how do I push the most product on them? I hear a lot of salespeople say, I don't want to be salesy. I don't want to be a typical salesperson. I don't want to be pushy and aggressive. But then I will see them piling into like an objection handling webinar on the 1 tip to say to your prospect to get their mindset in the way to where they buy. If the agenda is just to sell to them, and that is your primary focus above all else, but you pretend to be buddy-buddy with them or to not really care whether they buy, this is going to be the worst agenda. From my perspective, it might work. That's my problem with it, is it's manipulative to my buyer. It's, how do I manipulate my buyer into feeling like I'm not trying to do something when I am? This is the worst type in type number 1. So type number 1, again, is still having the agenda to sell is the only thing in my mind. But the way that I'm going to get there is by pretending to have their back and have no agenda, by acting more human, by acting more personable, by mirroring their words that they're saying, by sending them gifts, and on and on and on. But really all of that is geared towards is to get them to open up so I can manipulate them. The second type of agenda that I see within selling is having the agenda of selling them. And how people do it is by pressuring them or by schmoozing them. So this is kind of the more old school sales of like, I'm going to hammer you with 5 follow-up emails. I'm going to call your desk, and like, on and on and on. Hey, did you get an update? Did you get an update? Did you get an update? And you try to schmooze them by taking them to dinners, taking them to the golf course, sending them tickets to, I don't know, the football game. And the reason I'm laughing and I'm a little more lighthearted with this one is obvious. As someone is trying to close you. And so this second agenda in selling, and there's only 4 agendas you really can have. This second agenda in selling is my main primary agenda, just like in number 1, is to sell them. I want to sell. 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 The marquee of this one is that how people go about it is by pressuring them or by buying them gifts. So I like this one a little bit more, even though they're both terrible. At least this one's a little more overt. This one, it's very, very obvious. So again, number 1, you're trying to sell them, but how you're doing it is by pretending to be human with them and pretending to have their back. The second agenda is I'm still trying to sell them. That is my main primary focus. All I'm thinking about, and how I do this is by pressuring them, sending them 16,000 follow-up emails, or trying to schmooze them with some kind of gift. The third type of agenda is the same type of thing within prospecting. You have the agenda of booking the meeting. You're on a cold call with the prospect. You have the agenda of booking the meeting. And how you do that is by pressuring them, or most often is leading them. You're trying to get a certain type of answer from your prospect to have them opt in to book the meeting. Because in your mind, which again, it's going to come down to how are you measured? How are you paid? You're paid to book meetings. So what I want to do is ask questions in a certain way to get someone to actually buy. So this is the same type of flavor as Agenda 2. It's just within prospecting. I have the agenda of booking the meeting. So when I'm on the cold call with my prospects, I'm asking questions in a certain type of way, that gets them to self-lead themselves within the call, to trap them into taking the next meeting. And again, my agenda here is that I'm trying to sell. I'm trying to sell a meeting. Agenda 1, my primary focus is I'm trying to sell, but I'm doing it by looking like I'm not. The worst agenda. The most manipulative agenda. Agenda 2 is I have the agenda of selling them, but I'm just going to be overt about it. My focus is to sell. And number 3, it's the same thing within prospecting, but just within prospecting. My agenda on the phone with this person is to book the meeting. And how I do that is by asking them some type of leading question. All 3 of these agendas, again, number 1 will probably do you the most favors, because people will buy it, which makes me the most mad about it. All 3 of these agendas are what make salespeople have the reputation that they have today. The reputation of a salesperson is that we want to sell. We'll do anything to do it. We'll withhold, does the product actually work? We'll withhold, is it on the product roadmap? We'll withhold, is that the real price? We'll withhold all the case studies. I'm not talking about the couple where someone did well, but all the case studies where someone maybe didn't get value from our product, where we messed up. And those 3 agendas is we just want them to sell. We just want them to buy. And then we ask ourselves, why do salespeople have bad reputations? We're not all slimy. We're not all bad. But it's because we don't have our buyer's back. And our buyer knows it. So the 4th agenda, and full disclosure, before I go into this one, this is the hardest agenda to have because it's extremely counterintuitive to us as salespeople. But it, from my perspective, is the only way to sell in a way that actually helps your buyer and sell in a stress-free way because you're aggressive, but not about pushing quotas. You're aggressive about helping them. So the fourth agenda that you can have within selling is the agenda of helping them. That is your primary focus. How do I help the person? So you're going to need to know a multitude of things, which we're going to go into in a second to do this. But it is most often about your goal and your aim and your motive within the situation. Is my aim to help this person, or is my aim to sell to this person? And in my experience, when your aim is to help them and truly help them, you will sell more. But this has to be the focus. So this is agenda 4. So I'm going to go into what you're going to need to know to execute that golden agenda, and then 11 ways that you can do it. The first thing that you're going to need to know, so to help anyone, you're going to need to know them. Know something about them. This, full disclosure, is the hardest thing for sellers to do. Is how do I know all of my buyers? And a good marquee that I know that this problem is rampant within the industry is I'll hear people say, selling is a transferable skill. I can go from company to company to company to sell. I'm like, sure, if you don't care about knowing your buyer, because every time I change companies, I change buyers. So that's like saying there's no opportunity cost from me moving from France to Italy to Spain. The opportunity cost is every single time I change countries, I change languages. So the first thing you would need to know is you would need to know your buyer. The expertise of selling is not, especially when done well, is not an expertise in your product. If your expertise was your product, then we wouldn't need solutions engineers. Solutions engineers come in when the products with the understanding of the sales rep isn't there, and you need an engineer to come in to understand and explain and unpack for a customer something that's very technical. So our expertise is not our product. Our expertise is not manipulating people by using techniques. Our expertise needs to be our buyers. So there's a multitude of ways that you can do this. Number 1, knowing your buyer's metrics. So if you don't know, for instance, if you're watching this video, and no problem if the answer to this question is yes, I was there. I was there. If you are watching this video and you can't name for your, let's say, anywhere from 3 to 6 buyer personas, what they are metriced on, meaning what are the lagging indicators that they're typically within buyer persona trying to drive. So a sales rep, it would be quota attainment. A VP of sales, it's going to be revenue, a quota for the team, sales quota for the team, close ACV. For a SDR, it's going to be booked meetings, or qualified meetings, or SQLs or SALs, something to that degree. Depends on how the company defines it. For an SDR leader, same thing, but a pooled quota. For a CRO, it's going to be revenue. For a CSM, it's going to be net, upsell, cross-sell, resell, a churn, those are going to be the metrics. For a, human resources, it's going to be employee churn and ENPS score. If you don't know what your buyers are metriced on, I would stop this video, truly. I'd go to Google and I'd look up what is a CFO's KPIs? What is an engineer's KPIs? You'll find I, within 15 minutes, did this the other day, for 6 different buyer personas, was able to pull up a list of all the KPIs there's measured on. So the first thing I would know about my buyer is what are they metriced on? So a great example is if I didn't know that sales reps or SDRs were typically metriced on booked meetings, how could I on earth speak to them with any relevance? So this is the first thing that I would need to know. Second thing I would need to know is common problems or challenges that they are running into. So we're going to go into more on this, but I would want to know what are the common problems or challenges that they are running into. People buy to solve a problem that they're having. Great example being, right before we started filming this, I had a bunch of different wrinkles in this skirt because I had sat down for too long. There was a problem. Why? Because I was about to film and I thought it'd be super distracting. So we had a problem that we needed to solve. So Daniel was nice enough to go buy a steamer. Would he have bought a steamer if that hadn't come up? Probably not then. Why? He didn't have a problem. But all of a sudden, he, meaning me, had a problem. I couldn't film without him, without buying the steamer. So most people are going to buy based on problems. We're going to go into this more. But the second thing that I would know is what are the common problems or challenges for my buyer that they're trying to solve? So the third thing that I would want to know is what's relevant to my buyer persona statically, meaning what are the static, non-moving criteria that is normally relevant to them. So anything from the industry vertical that they're in, let's say, or the segment of the size of company, that they are within. Of a marketer at an SMB company is going to have usually a different litany of problems than a marketer at a enterprise company, let's say. But I want to know statically, where are they at in the market? And what are the different variables that exist about them as a buyer that would matter, that they think about? The fourth one is knowing what's going on with your buyer in relation to you. And what I mean by what's going on are what are the moving elements or triggers that have happened to them recently or that they have caused. So the first bucket is in relation to me. So a great example of this, again, this is going to be a trigger-based action in relation to you, is they downloaded content. They attended a webinar. They requested a demo. They requested a demo 6 months ago and they didn't show up and actually get a call. They had a demo with you and then they ghosted you. They never talked to you again. So this fourth bucket is knowing what these items are, knowing what the triggers that they have taken in relationship to either you or your company. So they've made a comment on your company's social page. They've made a comment on your page. Or one of the posts that you just put live. They requested content. They requested a webinar. They attended an event. They attended or became a member of a community that you're a part of. They got a free trial of your product. They got a freemium piece of your product. They just subscribed to your blog. They just subscribed to your newsletter. But all the things that are going on with them presently that are triggers in relationship to you or your company. So for more on this topic, if you go into the Comprehensive Encyclopedia of Sales Plays, I go into a litany of different trigger actions. But the fourth one here is, and the difference between 3 and 4 is 3 is just static. What industry, what segment are they in? 4 is all the things that are happening to them currently or just recently happened to them in relationship to you or your company. The fifth type of thing I would know about them is what's going on with them, meaning what triggers are happening to them, not in relationship to you or your company. So a great example of this would be they just IPO'd, or they just received company funding, or they just acquired another company, or they just released financial reports, or, they just changed companies. So this is a trigger about them, typically going to be firmographic, but it's something that happened to them or that they did in the marketplace, but it's not in relationship to you. So knowing all of these contextually is really going to help you understand what would hypothetically the pitch be to this person. So usually this is, sadly enough, number one is where where most people are going to get caught up. They're going to say like, oh shoot, I don't know my buyer's metrics. I'm like, well, I got good and bad news. The good news is, well, let's start with the bad news. The bad news is that all of this is needed to help your buyer. So the bad news is that we usually don't know any of this stuff or a lot of this stuff. The good news is you were selling to a certain degree before you knew any of this. So the more of this you add to your arsenal, the more and more and more and more and more relevant your conversation is going to become to them. So context for someone is respect. Giving them context to their situation of not a principle overall, but how does that specifically potentially solve a problem that they're having, is respect to our buyer. So having this agenda, of like, I want to help them. And the first step of that is knowing them. The good news is, again, we have such a massive, massive green opportunity right in front of us to get to know our buyer more so that we can help them more effectively. And then the last one here is knowing your buyer for your buyer. This is personalization. If you want to see more of this, if you go into personalization point, I go into personalization at scale, or within the hub for written, there's 6 different buckets of personalization you can personalize on. But I would effectively know all the things in specific to this person. And I put these in order of how I would get to know these first. Metrics are first. Challenges and problems are second, that are common for their buyer persona, so on and so forth. So this one will help you pattern interrupt, but I would know the things that buyer is doing in specific. Blogs that they've written, posts that they've written, things they're engaging with, things in their About Me section, things about their company, how long they've been at the company, etc. There's a litany of different options if you go to the 6 buckets of personalization and written, for instance. But this would be another bracket or another tier of what I would know about this person. So the reality is, if you're in sales, the great news is you're going to spend the rest of your career, at least I have, learning to ask better and better and better and better questions to your buyer. And having all of this or some subset of this, I would always say it's never too late to start. So I would just start with, if I don't know my buyer's metrics, I need to know this so I know how to contextualize to them. So that's the thing that I would need to know to execute this agenda. And again, the agenda that I have is to help them, not to sell them, to help them by way of selling. So the difference there, and I'm going to go into this in another episode, but the difference there, if you go into the 5 types of selling, is a doctor sells medication, really. They are giving someone medication to solve a problem. Why they're not called a seller is because they're diagnosing a problem first, to understand what's the problem, so I know what I'm solving for, so I know what medication to prescribe them, and then the person has to exchange money for the medication. But the reason doctors don't have to go to question strategy school like sellers is because their goal is to help. And their efficacy as a doctor or physician is, how do I uncover the problems that they're having so that I can help them? What you're going to find, at least in my experience, is when you have this agenda of, I want to help this person by way of understanding their problems, diagnosing them, prescribing a solution that will actually solve their problem, is not only will your numbers increase, but you will feel much better. You won't feel like you have to pull any really technique on the person, because your agenda and your mindset is, how do I help this person? I really got the luxury of going into this when I started to go into consulting. Because to be a consultant, I would have to ask them a lot of questions to understand, what are they trying to solve or solve for? And then what are the things and the culprits that are holding them back? And this, from a selling perspective, feels so much better as I get to help people. And it's just going to be a mindset shift. How do I help this person? And the first thing to helping anyone is knowing them. And then how do I use that knowledge and the conversation in the room to understand what problems they're running into, diagnose some causes, and then prescribe them a solution that'll help solve for their problem. See, 11 ways to execute them is by, number 1, helping your prospects by uncovering things for them that they don't know. This is how you can build credibility with your prospect. If you can uncover things for them that they don't know. I've seen a multitude of statistics recently that say that 87% of buyers would rather self-serve, whether that be for an enterprise software or a stick of gum. They want to self-serve. And if I had to guess why, it's because in their experience, sellers have never added any value to them. The only thing that they've added is pressure. And the way that you can very easily and quickly add value to your prospects is by telling them, uncovering things for them, and sharing with them things that they don't know. This is how you can be an advocate of your buyer. There are 4 different types of things that you can uncover for someone that will help them that they don't know. Number 1, you can help them by diagnosing a root cause for a problem that they know that they have. So usually this type of problem is going to be a symptom-based problem, which we'll go into in a second. But this is someone has pain in their arm. They come into the doctor and or like, I'm missing quota. I come into a consultant and I say like, hey, I'm missing quota. That's my pain. That's the problem that I want to solve for. And how you can help them is by diagnosing a root cause. Why this is happening. What is causing them to miss quota? That is something that they don't know. They know that they have a problem. They're missing quota, but they don't know why. So this is an expertise. The first way that you can help someone is by diagnosing a root cause for a problem that they know that they have, but they don't know what's causing it. So in my experience, and I'm going into it in one of the other episodes, sales reps talk about like, how do I build credibility with my buyer? How do I build rapport with my buyer? How do I get my buyer to trust me? And I'm like, you have to know things that they don't. You have to know things that they don't. That's the only way. You don't have to ask them questions in a certain way. You have to know things that they don't. So if they have a problem and they don't know the cause of it, this is the first way that you can add value. It's diagnosing why they're running into that problem. The second type of way you can help them is by helping them by diagnosing that they have a problem that they didn't know that they have. This is the fastest way to build rapport with someone. And the fastest way to earn credibility is telling them about a problem, sharing with them, understanding that you're like, oh, this person is running into this problem based on what I'm seeing. And they need to know. And I'll give you an example. There was a person who sold to me at one point. They pinged me on a Friday night. I'll never forget it. It's about 9:30 p.m. They said, hey, Becc, and this is just after I just started Flip the Script. They said, hey, you don't know me. My name's, I'll give his name. He was like, my name's Jay. I've been watching videos on your website. They're great. Da-da-da. Here's the thing. If I Google your name, Becc Holland, and flip the script dead on, your website doesn't come up. And I believe it's because your metadata is off. I diagnosed it with an engineer, and I found out that it's because these criterion of your metadata need to be changed. If you give me 30 minutes, I can walk through what we found and a couple quick ways that you can solve for it, with no cash involvement, then a couple quick ways that you could solve for it even more aggressively, if you were wanting to spend the money. He was like, are you willing to do that? I said, what's your number? And I called him. And I'm like, dude, you can have the keys to my car. I had a problem that I didn't even know that I had. I had no idea if you Googled my name and my company name dead on that my website wasn't coming up. And that was a huge problem or something that was harming me because I wanted for people to see these episodes. So instantly, we are still friends to this day. Instantly, I said, of course you can have my time. And I thanked him. I'm like, you have my back. You just showed me a problem that I didn't know that I even had. So diagnosing a problem, hey, they have a problem that they didn't know that they have. This is the second way that you can help them. The third way that you can help them is by prognosing or forecasting an impact that they weren't aware could happen to them. So again, this is going to be hinged off of they weren't considering or they didn't know a piece of information, and you're going to help them by way of uncovering if that impact is a real potential threat and then sharing that with them. So prognosing an impact that they don't know will happen. I hear people, and I cannot get off into tangents about this, even though my heart is beating super fast, but I hear people, they're like, well, what will happen to you if you don't blank? And I'm like, they don't know. You can't make someone self-prognose. That should be your expertise as a seller. What will likely happen to this person if they don't change this thing? That's how you can build credibility. That's how you can build rapport. And again, your prospects will thank you when you're selling in this manner of like, oh my gosh, Jay, you prevented me from hemorrhaging potential people from watching my videos. Jay, if you're watching this, again, thank you. He had my back and he knew what that would likely cause in the future. That regardless the amount of content that I put up, that people would not watch it, which he thought that will probably be a problem for her. She'll want to know about that. And then the last way you can help them is by prescribing a solution to the problems that they're having that will help them solve those problems. So to do this, I'm going to go click in deep here. I want to bring up a book and a man that have influenced me very, very heavily. So if you can't see his name and his face, there is a book written by a man named Keenan, and the book is called Gap Selling. And it truly is one of the most groundbreaking methodologies that I have ever seen in my entire career. And keep in mind, I'm a sales training dweeb. If there is training or there's a methodology out there, I usually have seen it and double clicked. And this was the first time that I read something that I thought, that is groundbreaking. That changes the way that I would view sales and how people can sell. So the rest of my double click here, I would highly, highly recommend that if you haven't, go pick up a copy of Gap Selling. Keenan's absolutely amazing, and he goes into the different pieces of that. The rest of this session is going to be based off of the work of what he did. So I got the privilege of doing a double click here because problem-centric selling, what he goes into is how do you solve your buyer's problems? And that is the cathexis of your sale. So how do I understand the problems that they're running into, diagnose the cause, prognose the impact that will happen to them, and solve their problems? Because buyers are going to buy to solve a problem. Absolutely groundbreaking, the differences and the impact that problem-centric selling can have on you versus pain-centric or feature-centric or benefit-centric. But problem-centric selling truly, truly changed the way I thought about sales. So this is going to be, for the rest of this presentation, the 11 types of problems that you can be solving for your buyer that is a double click on his work. So I would first, if you haven't already, I would go pick up a copy of this. I couldn't recommend it more highly. So the first thing that I would want to know to have the agenda of helping my buyer is knowing things about them. The second thing that we went into in the last slide, the second thing that I would want to know are what are the problems that need to be solved? What are the problems that need to be solved or need to be solved for? So the first thing that I need to know is what is the problem that they're running into. So there are 11 different types of problems that we're going to go into in this section. So full disclosure, it's going to be meaty, but these are the problems that I would want to uncover that my buyers are running into, or my prospective buyers are running into, that I can solve for. So the first is going to be a symptom-based problem. So a symptom-based problem, and so you'll have to open the deck, obviously, because it's going to get pretty meaty. The symptom-based problem is going to be a problem whereby the prospect wants to solve is a symptom that they had. So a symptom and a sign, which we're going to go into in a little bit, but a symptom is going to be subjective in nature, meaning it's based on feeling or emotion. And by definition, a symptom is noticed by the patient, not someone else. So this is a problem. Your prospect, this is typically going to be when someone inbounds, that they're going to inbound based on a symptom-based problem. And it's because they're experiencing some type of pain that they want to solve for. So this type of problem in nature can initially only be noticed by the prospect and typically is going to be pain-based. So this is why most people go to a doctor. This is why most people inbound in terms of they want to talk to you about your product, is they have a certain pain and they want to solve for it by using your product potentially. So a flip the script example, which I go into for each one of these, is a prospect that inbounds, and they want sales training or talk about it because they want to drive more quota attainment. So the problem that they're having is that their sales team hasn't hit quota over the last 4 months and they want to do something about it. So they have a pain, they have a symptom, they know it exists, it's painful in the present, and they're like, okay, how do I alleviate this by solving the root cause of this thing, of whatever is causing for my team to not hit quota? So this is the most common type of problem that I see. And what you're solving for in this situation is they're trying to get relief from the system persisting. So the impact that they'll see if they don't solve for it or don't solve for it correctly is essentially the pain will continue to persist, or it will persist at an increased level of aggression. So it's a problem that's usually pain-based. It comes as a result of a symptom, meaning the person or the prospect notice it. Their goal is, or what they're trying to solve for in the situation, is the pain to be alleviated in the present that they're currently incurring. And if they don't solve this problem, then typically the impact that they're going to see is that the pain persists, the symptom persists, and usually it's going to increase with level of aggression or impact. So I put some characteristics down here. Typically, this is going to be a negative-based problem. So I go into this, I double click into this much more deeply in a couple of different episodes, but this is going to, symptoms, pains, problems, and signs is the episode. I can't remember which one. I want to say 9, but this is essentially going to be, or no, this is 9. I can't remember which one, but it's somewhere within the season. I double click more, but this type of problem is going to be a negative problem. It can be qualitative or quantitative, and the likelihood of this kind of person inbounding is very high to very high. So I'd say part of the problem behind how we're prospecting today is that we are prospecting based on pain only. So we're like, hey, are you running into this pain? Even if the person is. Usually if someone, the general rule of thumb is that 5% of your market is in buying mode, 5% of your market will never buy, and that the 90 in between is where you are measured, where your efficacy is as a sales rep. The problem with what we're doing today, currently, why prospecting isn't working for most people, or outbound is very tough, is because they are outbounding by asking people about pain and banking on that they run into someone that's within the 5% that was about to buy but didn't inbound because they just hadn't gotten to it yet. Because if you're outbounding based on pain, even if the person has the pain, if it was egregious enough or there was a big enough impact to them, if they didn't want to get it to stop, or if it doesn't stop, they would have inbounded. If the pain was high enough, then they would have said, I'm going to the doctor. I got to find a solution because this thing is so painful. So if you're trying to outbound based on pain only, you might run into someone that says, yeah, I run into that pain. But by definition, typically you're going to run into someone that, yes, they identify with that pain, but the pain isn't big enough for them by definition, because otherwise they would have inbounded. So usually this is why I say sales reps are leaving their numbers up to luck, because they're only outbounding based on pain, which is the portion of the market that even if they are running into the pain, they have self-assessed that for whatever reason, the impact isn't high enough, there isn't an actual problem, that they don't need to solve for it because it's not hurting them that badly. But this is the first type of problem. Typically, it's going to be an inbound. It's be a negative problem. It's qualitative or quantitative. And it's very high likelihood of inbounding is a symptom-based problem. This is a problem where the prospect just wants to solve to alleviate the symptom or subjective painful experience they're currently incurring, because that pain or the impact is so egregious. This second piece is going to be a chart of what you have to identify within the selling process, what you need to challenge the prospect on, what you need to diagnose in this situation, what you need to prognose or forecast in the situation, and what you need to prescribe. So let's kind of start from the top here. So what you need to identify about this type of problem is what are the symptoms or pain they're experiencing. And then if they've self-diagnosed of what they think the cause is, you need to understand what are the symptoms that they're experiencing that led them to believe that they have a certain problem. To do this season, true story, I went to several different doctors and set appointments, even though I didn't need them, to ask them a number of questions. And I said, how often, when someone schedules an appointment with you, are they scheduling for a symptom, meaning a pain, or are they scheduling an appointment just to get a general checkup? And they said, most of the time it's going to be because they're experiencing a pain. I'm like, okay, so how often are they self-diagnosing? Meaning they're saying, I think that I have this problem, that's causing the pain. And they said, most of the time people are going to self-diagnose to some degree. I said, okay. So next question, how often in your experience, when they're self-diagnosing, are they wrong? He said, the first doctor said 90% of the time. The second doctor said 95% of the time. So even if your prospect comes in on an inbound line and says, I have this problem that I want to solve, I'm experiencing this pain, this is what's causing it, by definition, typically, they're going to get it incorrect. So even if you help them solve that thing for that thing, if it's not the root cause, you're not going to solve their ultimate problem, which was to get the pain to go away. So a great example would be, sometimes people come to me and they say like, hey, we need sales training because, I'll give you an example. We need sales training because our reps aren't hitting quota. Okay. So I have to ask them a number of different questions. And in this one case scenario, they said, our sales reps aren't hitting training and the culprit is the cold calls. They don't have a methodology in terms of the cold calls. I said, okay, let me do some digging. I said, give me a license to your sales engagement instance. They said, okay, no problem. So I jump in and I did some digging. And I came back and I set a meeting with them. I said, I got good news and bad news. Which one do you want first? And they're like, we want bad news first. And I'm like, nah, I'm going to start with the good news. The good news is we have a massive opportunity in front of us. The bad news is that you have likely hemorrhaged 100% of the results that you could have seen from cold calls. And the culprit was not that your reps aren't trained. They're like, what's the culprit? I said, well, I went into your sales engagement instance and your dialer wasn't hooked up. Which means you've had 50 reps that for the last 3 years haven't made a dial because the dialer's not hooked up. So if I had taken their advice, meaning they said the problem is our reps aren't trained, they're not hitting quota. The problem is our reps aren't trained on cold calls. If I had taken their advice, their self-diagnosis, and said, okay, great, I'll train your reps on cold calls and then they'll do better, I would have not uncovered that the true problem is their dialer wasn't even hooked up. So their reps weren't even making calls. Are they good? Are they not? Do they need training? I don't know, because they hadn't made any dials yet. So the point being is to the first thing I identify is what are the pains. The second thing that I would identify is if they have self-diagnosed, what are the symptoms that are evidence of that diagnosis? What you need to challenge. This bucket's going to be big here. If they've self-diagnosed, but they haven't self-prescribed, meaning they think that they know the root cause of the symptom, but they haven't figured out what they think the solution is, you must challenge if the self-diagnosis is correct or is it a misdiagnosis. So in this instance, if I had gone into their instance and noticed that their dialer was hooked up and that they were making calls and the quality of the calls weren't good, then I would say, okay, this person is correct in their self-diagnosis. But in this case scenario, it was a misdiagnosis. The problem at the base was their dialer wasn't hooked up. If the self-diagnosis is incorrect, then you have to tell the prospect that it's incorrect. If the self-diagnosis is correct, but what they have prescribed you believe is incorrect, so they've identified correctly the root cause of what's causing their symptom, but what they say that they need is incorrect because they don't need that thing to get them there. They need something else based on your expertise. Then you have to challenge them that the self-prescription is incorrect. A lot of people come to me and they ask me for tactical training. The lion's share of the time where we're making an aggressive jump in terms of their numbers is not tactical training. It's lead routing or KPI systems or inbound demo request process or team structure or segmentation or TAM identification. Now, people come to me most often thinking that training is the problem. My reps aren't trained on how to have a cold call effectively or send an email effectively. But I have to live and breathe to have my prospects back to help them. I have to live and breathe in this bucket. I have to challenge what they say they need, most likely, by definition, is going to be incorrect. So to help them, you have to understand, is their diagnosis correct? And if it is, have they self-prescribed a solution that is correct too? And to do this, you have to, A, have expertise and know your buyer. But B, you have to be okay with asking them some questions and uncomfortable questions sometimes. And it's harder on you in the moment, right? Because you're not just saying, what would you like? What would you need? What can I get you today? But long term, in my experience especially, you actually solve their problem. And the impact of that is they're indebted to you to some degree. People who have solved my problems and challenged me that actually what I need is what I think I need is different than what I actually need based on my goal and my symptoms. That's someone who I know, A, has credibility, but B, has my back so I can trust them. So what I need to diagnose in this case is what are the symptoms or pains that they're having. And then you don't need to prognose anything, meaning forecast anything. And the prescription should be a plan that will eradicate their symptoms, eradicate the pains that they're experiencing by solving the root cause of the symptom. So the plan should include, and I put this down here for every bucket below, it can either include your products, your services, which ones of them they need to use, what use case do they need to use it in, where do they need to use it, when do they need to use it, and how should they use it. But this should be some type of plan with your products or services of how do they solve for the problem that you know that they have that's causing the symptom and the reason of why they're in there. The second type of problem is going to be a sign-based problem. This is the most, to me, interesting type of problem. So the difference between a sign and a symptom is a symptom is going to be subjective and is going to be noticed by the patient only, by definition. A sign is going to be objective, meaning it's not feeling based, and it can be only by definition be noticed by an expert or a medical professional, but in this case, you. Sign-based problems are the most deadly problems for prospects. And the reason is they aren't pain related. So this is why you have to go for a checkup, or you should go for a checkup once a year. Is you're a expert is testing for signs, blood pressure, etc., of things that would tell them that they know you have a condition that you didn't know about because there was no pain-based symptom. And these are the most deadly for your prospects, are things that they are running into that they don't know they're running into. So if you outbound based on pain only, you're leaving on the table that you could have their back by outbounding based on problems that they're having that they didn't even know they were having. So the example of Jay, the person who reached out to me, I didn't know I had a problem. It took him 2 seconds to build rapport with me. We're still friends to this day because he looked for signs, not symptoms. So a sign-based problem is going to be a problem where the issue that the prospect that they want to solve for came as a result of an expert noticing a sign that could potentially show them that they have a deeper condition. So this type of problem is objective in nature and can only be noticed by an outside expert. So I gave a flip the script example of I asked the prospect, I asked a lot of my prospects this, what is the qualification criteria for a meeting that is deemed qualified by an AE? The prospect will respond to me sometimes that the SDR has to ask BANT questions, meaning do you have budget, do you have authority, do you have need, and do you have a timeline? And that the AE is approving based on that. That is a sign-based question. And the reason is my prospects typically don't know that if they tell me that this is a qualification criteria, I know two things are typically happening that are hurting them. Number one, that is subjective criteria on whether someone has a need or what is the timeline. So typically you're going to see a swing rate of up to 85% between AE to AE of what is being qualified based on just some subjective experience. So it can cause your SDRs to say like this was qualified, this was the right title, and they'll start to get frustrated and churn on you, and you'll start to churn some of your prospects that could have bought in the meantime because they were after the answers to questions that doesn't truly mean whether they'll buy or not. Someone will buy when they have a problem. Right? So this is going to cause one of two things. Number one, there's going to be a severe disconnect between your SDRs and account executives. And number two, if you're asking your prospects those questions, specifically on outbound, another tangent for another time. But if I'm outbounding someone saying, please talk to me, please talk to me, please talk to me, please talk to me, they say yes. And then I'm like, cool, but before we do you have money? And are you the decision maker? And what's your timeline for your need? And they're like, what need? Right? What need? Another topic for another time. This is a sign-based problem. I'm asking my prospect the question of how are they deeming that something's qualified? If they answer with BANT questions, I know as the outside expert that they probably have some problems based on this. But they don't know that that's a sign that they have deeper problems. So I would have to validate, can you tell me what is the swing rate between AE to AE of what they're saying is qualified? Out of, if you had 100 meetings, that were scheduled that came through from an inbound perspective, 100 people that raised their hand saying that they wanted a meeting, how many typically are making it into a first discovery call with a account executive? They'll usually have to go look for the data point because they didn't know it was a problem. They'll come back to me and they'll say anywhere from 6 to, on the high end, 25%, meaning 75% in a great case scenario of their buyers who have raised their hand saying, I want to talk to you about buying your product, aren't getting there because they have to go through the process of being asked BANT questions by SDRs. Again, another topic for another time. There's a sign-based problem because they wouldn't know that their answers are telling me that they have a condition, and a deadly condition, because it keeps going on and persisting because they didn't know it was a problem. But this type of problem is really where you hallmark your expertise, because you can make them aware of a problem they didn't know they were having. When Jay made me aware that I was churning users based on my metadata, he had all the credibility in the world. I thought this person can probably solve for it because this person is the one who noticed it. So point being, this is really where you can display your expertise. What they're solving for is, after they know the problem exists, to remedy the condition from existing if possible, to stop the spread and the impact of the problem if they can, and then prevent that from spreading, the impact of that from spreading onto their team. So the type of impact that they will incur here is a negative impact, that if they don't solve the problem, the condition, persists, it worsens over time. Again, their swing rate, they're churning thousands of leads, because of their low qualification or their low conversion percentage, because they're asking BANT question. The condition keeps going on, probably spreads throughout the organization, that it's going to worsen because their pipeline is going to be lower and lower and lower and lower. Their account executives are going to churn because they're not hitting their quotas because they don't have these leads. So the impact of not solving a sign-based problem is the condition persists and gets worse, and the impacts get more aggressive. And again, your prospect doesn't know. So this is typically going to be a very negative impact. It can be qualitative or quantitative, but typically what you're going to see is it's quantitative, because I'm measuring for an overt indicator. And the likelihood, this is the most stunning thing about a sign-based problem, the likelihood of them inbounding is low, meaning they don't know they have a problem. This is where we can help people. They don't know they have a problem until we enter the situation. So a sign-based problem, what you need to identify is, does a problem exist? I'm going to ask them a number of questions, and do I think a problem exists based on those answers? If you do see the signs of a problem, you have to challenge them, unfortunately, in this instance, that they probably do have a problem. So it has been an uncomfortable situation where I've done the following. If I'm going head-to-head in a competitive race, sometimes all my competitors are probably watching this. Here you go. Here's the book that I'm running. If I'm going head-to-head, a lot of times something I solve for is not just training, but process. So I'll request a demo of my prospect. I'll document my journey. Then I'll go to their competitor and I'll request a demo from them and document my journey. And then in the final meeting, I'll say, here you go. I requested a demo of your product. Took me 5 days to get a response from any of your reps. I got 1 email, 1 call, no voicemails, and that's it. I requested a demo from your main competitor. I got an immediate response. I got 3 emails. I got 5 calls, 2 voicemails, and they even reached out to me over social. And then I shut up. The room implodes. They're like, oh my goodness. Now, what I'm solving for is sales training. That is how I have won these deals. I have not lost a deal yet. Thank goodness. Thank you to my customers, by the way, that I've done that in. The reason is I uncovered a problem for them that they didn't even know that they had. Because if they had known that their rep was only sending 1 email, they would have done something about it. So I don't even say my opinion in this case scenario, but I say, here's the journey. And they hands down, again, thank goodness, have said she was an expert enough to identify a problem that we didn't know that we have. So we believe that she's an expert enough to not only solve this problem, but our other problems that we're having. So this is what you need to challenge, is that they to their knowledge, don't think that they have a problem. What to diagnose is what the problem is based on the signs that you're seeing. So I would guess in that case scenario, again, that they are hemorrhaging users, and especially to competitors, if people are co-evaluating both, that they're going to go to their competitors. More likely, the vast majority of a decision is based on how quickly you get back to the person. So in accordance with their competitors, not only are they hemorrhaging deals, but they're sending them over the fence to their main competitor. This is going to be based on those signs. What do I think the problem potentially is, but I'm not sure yet. And then what to prognose is what will happen to them if the problem continues to go on as is. If they remain current state, business as is, they don't fix their inbound demo request process at all, this is potentially what will happen. I could say, dependent on the data of like 3x, 4x more likelihood that they're going to go to your main competitor, you're going to lose X amount of market share based on X, Y, and Z. And again, this is hinged on you asking the right questions to uncover the data within their current state. You cannot do this without asking them questions. The great thing about this, though, and I go into it in episode 1, is you don't have to ask leading questions or technique questions anymore. You're actually after the data of what's happening with them so you can help them with the problem. A doctor doesn't have to go to questioning school. Why? They're after helping them. So what you're prognosing in this case scenario is the impact of what will happen to them if they let the problem remain as is. And then what to prescribe is a prescription of a plan that will solve the problem, lessen the spread of it across the organization, lessen the impact of it, and prevent it from returning. And the same plan of what it should include. If they should use your products, what products they should use, which ones they should use, what case scenarios, where, when, and how they should use them. The third type of problem. This is a long session. I know. This is the only session. From my perspective, this is the only session. Number 3, threat-based problems. Threat-based problems are going to be a type of problem that come as a result when a prospect is perceiving that something's going to happen to them in the future if they leave their current state as is. So this is off a perceived threat that they're not positive it will happen, but they're guessing. So the example for me would be, and keep in mind, these are all examples that have happened, actually happened. So a prospect comes in wanting to improve their team's discovery calls. They want to believe, they want to improve their discovery calls or their emails because they believed in the current state that they were hitting their goals as is. They were completely fine. But they were afraid, based on the quality of the calls that they knew that their reps were having, that their competitors potentially would start to win deals against them. And the reason they believed that is they had seen that their competitor had raised funding, and so they thought they were going to invest in their salespeople. So they're like, all's good as is. But what I'm afraid of is if we don't get better at cold calls, then we might hit a threat, a perceived threat, that might happen, that they start losing a bunch of competitive deals. This is going to be a very high likelihood that they're going to inbound. And this is going to be the tinfoil hat thing, of like, do they think that they're going to hit the threat? And once the threat becomes real enough, or the impact is real enough to them or high enough to them, the opportunity cost of that threat actually occurring, they're going to say, I want to solve for it. So what they're solving for is to change their current state set up in a way of how do I get my current state set up to a condition that I believe will help me avoid the threat in the future. And the impact of not solving for it is that the potential threat, what they're afraid of, actually comes true. So the interesting thing about this problem is if you solve for it, or solve for it correctly, then the threat doesn't come true. Sometimes you're not sure whether the perceived threat didn't come true because it wasn't a real threat, or whether it was a real threat, you just solved for it. So this is why I say it's a tinfoil hat problem to some degree, because it's off of something you think will likely happen, but you're not sure. It's a negative impact problem. It could be qualitative or quantitative, and the likelihood of inbounding is high. It's going to be high in this case scenario. So what I'm trying to identify first off the bat is what the threat is that they're afraid is happening, first thing first. And I have 3 things that you need to challenge. 1 that you should, 2 that you must. The one that you should, in my opinion, is based on the questions that you're asking. I would challenge to them, if I have their back, whether I think the threat is valid that they're running into. They might want to move forward as is either way. So this has happened to me a number of times where I have listened to the person. They're like, we're afraid that this is going to cause this. And I'm listening and I'm like, I don't believe that would happen. Now, if my agenda was to sell them, I'd shut up. Let them buy. But if my agenda is to help them, I should challenge that. And if they still want to perceive and move forward as is, let them. But the integrity-driven move, again, people are asking me or saying, I don't want to be a normal seller, then I'm like, then don't. Have the gumption and the character to not. Challenge them. I actually think based on what you're saying, you don't need this. This isn't likely to happen. Now, I'm happy to help if you'd like me to. But I don't believe that I don't think this is going to come true either way. And I feel like I owe you that based on the questions that you're asking. If the threat is valid, you're like, I can see that happening. You have to challenge if what they've identified that they should change to avoid the threat is correct. This happens to me all the time. I'm telling you, self-diagnosis is almost synonymous with misdiagnosis. So if they're like, we're afraid that our competitor is going to take me over, so I need to change my cold calls. I take a look at their system. I'm like, I believe you. I think that's a valid threat, but it's not the cold calls you need to change. You need to change your emails first and the amount of your cold calls. And yes, we can talk about cold call training, but like a lot of these case scenarios, I am somehow winning credibility by downselling. You don't actually need this thing. You need something else, X, Y, and Z for these reasons. But if the threat is valid that you're hearing, so first you should challenge if you don't think the threat is valid. Second, you should challenge if you think the threat is valid, that what they've identified to change in their current state, you believe would help them avoid their future state from being the threat being actually realized. And if the threat is valid and the current state elements that they've identified are correct, of like, you think the threat is valid that they'll be taken over by their competitors, you also believe that the cold calls are the culprit behind it, then you must challenge the way that they're envisioning it being changed is correct. Meaning you have to challenge their self-prescription, to challenge your buyers. And I want to say a note on this. I've heard a lot of people saying, I love to challenge my buyers. And I'm like, that's a personality thing. Meaning you shouldn't love to challenge your buyers because I like to challenge my buyers because I like to be big man or woman in the room. The only reason you should love to challenge your buyers is because it helps them from buying the wrong thing. The way that you do that is completely up to you. But I do think there are some questions that are just after, I want to challenge people because I like doing that. You owe it to your buyers to challenge them when they are off the path of what you think is correct. And to have that perspective, I'm going to double, triple asterisk mark, you need to be an expert in your buyer. But I do think that the challenge is important. So I challenge if I don't think the threat is valid. If the threat is valid, and I would challenge, are the current state elements that they want to change, are they correctly identified that those are the ones that will help them avoid the potential threat if changed correctly? and then I challenge the way at which they envision it. So what to diagnose? The first thing that I would diagnose is what are the current state current state elements that they believe, that we identified over here of like, that they believe need to be changed to avoid the threat. Do I think that those, if they self-diagnose, do I think that those are correct? Or if they haven't self-diagnosed, what are they? So if they say, we're afraid that our competitors are going to sell better than us and they're going to take market share, it's up to me as the expert to ask a certain amount of questions to understand, what do I think the current state elements are that you should change? What lever should I be changing? This is going to be hinged off of knowing your buyer. This is the only way to sell, from my perspective. This is the only way to add any value as a salesperson. What to prognose? Are there any other potential threats that you think might happen? Again, sometimes I'll say like, hey, I agree with you. This threat is valid. Also, something that might be happening to you. Can you tell me if X, Y, and Z? And they'll say yes. And I'm like, if that goes unchanged, I believe this other thing's going to happen to you as well. So this would be something to prognose or forecast for them. And what to prescribe is a prescription of a plan that will change the current state elements that if they remain unchanged, you believe will cause that future potential threat of becoming realized. What is the plan to change them into a state that will help them avoid those potential threats from coming true? Number 4, future metric-based problems. So future metric-based problems are, now we're getting into the lighter types of problems. A future metric-based problem is one that it's a problem to solve for as a result of a future metric that is going to go into place. So in this case scenario, the problem that you're trying to solve for is their current way of doing business is fine according to their current metrics, but in 3 months, whether that be a raised quota attainment, lower or a higher ENPS score, maybe this is goals for a company, like overall we need to influence these 5 KPIs. Their current way of doing business helps them achieve their current goals, but a future metric is going to be issued in that their current way of doing business won't get them to their future metric in the future. So they're planning for it now. So a great example is, SDR team is hitting their numbers currently. And again, these are all real examples that I have experienced and been fortunate enough to work with. They're exceeding target, but a new quota is going to come about in Q3. They're going to get a raised quota. Fun. So the current results are they're at 110% of quota. They're sending the emails, they're making the dials, they're hitting their quota. But in Q3, they're going to get a raised quota. And that raised quota, they'll only be at 60% if they stay as is. So they said like, hey, we need training. We're fine as is, but in Q3 is not the time to get trained. The time to get trained is now. We'll blast out our current quota. And then when Q3 comes in, we'll hit that quota as well because of our increased level of quota attainment. So what you're solving for in this case is to change the current way of doing things that will enable them to achieve the results that we're looking for in the future. So this can be any full disclosure type of metric. In my case scenario, it's going to be obviously quotas with BDRs, AEs, that's who I talk to. But this could be any type of metric, whether that be for a CRO, a CFO, a CTO of like, I want to lower the amount of incidents. Like currently, we're only allowed to have one, incident within our warehouse, per quarter, and we need to avoid that. We're getting a new metric, that we're supposed to have 0. Per quarter. So this is any type of metric that your buyer is metriced on. So the impact of not solving this is essentially once that quota is issued in, once that metric is issued in the future, their current way of doing things didn't change at all. And so they're achieving their current results, which is going to be fine today, but not okay whenever that metric is issued in. So they're going to miss the metric. That would be the type of impact that will happen if you don't solve it. It's going to be a neutral problem. So I go into this, I believe in symptoms, signs, pains, and problems. I don't know what episode it is. There are 3 types of problems: negative, neutral, and positive. This is a neutral problem, meaning they're solving for it. They're not solving any current pain. So a great example is when you get a math test, it says solve for y. Doesn't say solve why. It says solve for why. They're trying to arrange things in their current state to achieve something in the future. The business impact would be if they don't arrange for that correctly, right? But they're solving for this problem. So you're going to have a lower amount, typically, heat of people coming in because they haven't incurred any pain yet, right? They're just worried about something down the future. But this is qualitative or quantitative. You're going to see typically quantitative in this case scenario because it's a metric, so it's a hard cursor. But what you're trying to identify are what are the current elements that are driving the current results and what is the future metric. If they've self-diagnosed what they think they need to change in their current state, you need to challenge that you think it's the correct self-diagnosis. So they say like, hey, we have a quota of 10 meetings, outbound meetings per month, per rep. This quarter, we are exceeding it. In Q3, it's going to increase to 15. So we want to increase the quality of our cold calls. I need to ask a certain amount of questions, whether how many calls are they making? Can I hear a sample of the calls? Do they have a script from a scale of 1 to 10 that's ironed out? How are they handling objections? If they don't have a script, then what is their game plan on the phone? Are they personalizing? I'm going to ask a number of different questions. Are you cold emailing? How many emails are you sending? Can you give me an example of that? How are the accounts scored out? Do you have an inbound team and an outbound team? If someone inbounds that an outbound rep owns, do they get credit for that? What is their current quota attainment? What is their current quota attainment goal? Do they have an activity metric? Are they actually hitting that or exceeding that? There's a number of different questions that I'm going to ask. And what I'm asking is not because I just want all this information. It's because they told me that their cold callers are the problem, and I'm not sure that they are. So I want to understand, is their diagnosis correct? Or is it their cold email that's holding them back? So if they've self-diagnosed and they've self-prescribed, they've self-diagnosed correctly, they said it's our cold calls that is holding us back from exceeding to hit 15 meetings for this future metric. And I'm like, I take a look through, I'm like, yeah, I believe the culprit too. If they self-prescribed and they said that we need training, they might not. They might need better lead lists. They might need, more personalization within their call. They might need to turn their dialer on. It could be a number of different things, but if they self-prescribe what they think the problem is, then I need to challenge that is correct as well. What I'm diagnosing are the current state elements that are helping them yield their current metric and exceed their current metric, but are going to make them miss long-term their future metric if they don't change them. You don't have to prognose anything. And what you need to prescribe is a plan that will help them reach a condition today that achieves their future metric once it's enacted. So an example being, I have been a runner most of my life. I love to run. Used to run track, but I actually didn't like running competitively. I like running, by myself. It's a very relieving activity for me. I have currently, I just ran a race and I ran a certain speed clip. And that's great for this current race. But I'm thinking about, can't believe I'm admitting this, thinking about doing a marathon in the future. And so it's currently my pace, my clip, my training is okay today, as is. But I have a future metric that I want to hit. So I have to change the elements in my current state so that when this marathon happens, I'm not hosed. So it's all about changing my current state so that when this future metric comes in, I run this marathon and I have a certain goal time in my head, I'm able to hit it. I hit my time for the 15K, but I need to get better today. So in November, if I do run the New York Marathon, that I will hit this time, but that means my training needs to change today. So that would be the prescription. You're trying to give them a plan, tools, how to use them, when to use them, what tools they should use, etc. So when that marathon day comes, that they hit their actual future metric. The next type of problem is a future event-based problem, very similar to a future metric-based problem. And I do want to call something out here. The difference between a future metric, a future event, and a threat-based problem is a threat-based problem is perceived. I think something's going to happen. A future metric-based problem, you are positive the metric's going to come into place. And a future event, it's very similar. You're positive an event is going to happen in the future. And so you need to solve for it accordingly. So this is a problem, whereas an event's going to happen in the future, and it's one that means that their current way of doing business is fine. But this event, it's not a metric. This event means that their current state in the future, their current way of doing business is not going to suffice for the future event they're going to yield. So this is usually going to be based on, can I avoid a negative impact? So the example here, and this shout out to Keenan. Keenan actually gave me this example, the king of problems. But all people are mandated to have car insurance currently today. But there's a mandate that mandate's going to be lifted in Q3. So I'm, talking to an insurance company, let's say, or I'm talking to, an insurance company, that there's a mandate that people have to buy it now, but that's going to be lifted in Q3. So that's a future event that they're positive will happen. So they want sales training, because once that mandate is lifted, people don't mandatorily have to buy insurance anymore. So now they're going to have to pull some other lever to make sure that their numbers don't decrease. That could be sales capacity, that could be ability, that could be, lead generation. But this insurance company wants to evaluate sales training because their sales reps have to probably get better, because once the mandate isn't in place that people have to have insurance, what they potentially will likely see is people won't buy insurance as much. There's not that safety net. So what they're solving for is for their to change their current state in a way that enables them to achieve the ideal state in the current state that they believe is necessary to avoid the what will happen to them when the future event comes in place. So this is more avoidant based, but it's off of the positive. You are positive that an event's going to happen that you believe will change your reality. So you have to change your reality today to suffice for that. So the impact would essentially be, once the event occurs, that the negative impact that you believed would happen, in this case scenario, you thought that your sales reps would massively decrease in quota attainment because this mandate is lifted, so people don't have to buy anymore, that becomes true. So very similar to a threat-based problem, but in this case scenario, you're positive the future event is going to happen, so you need to solve in the current state accordingly. So this is slightly negative for the type of problem that it is, because you believe that it's going to happen, but you're not positive. So I'd say usually a metric base is going to be neutral. This is going to be slightly negative. It can be either qualitative or quantitative, and the likelihood of inbounding is high. So what you need to identify is, what is the future event? What's the future event that's going to take place, and when is it going to occur? If they've self-diagnosed what they think that they need to change in the current state to avoid that impact from the future event, you have to, as always, it is your duty and responsibility as a sales rep to challenge if their self-diagnosis is correct. If it's correct and they self-prescribed as well, fresh new hell, then you need to go ahead and challenge that their prescription is correct. They said that they need to change their current state, way of calls, because they're afraid that they're going to see decline in sales once the mandate is lifted. You need to understand, is it the calls that are the problem? And they said that they want to do it in a certain way. I need to challenge that the self-prescription is correct to solve that problem. What you need to diagnose are, what are the current state elements that would that they should change in order to prevent that potential threat from coming true once the future event occurs. Nothing to prognose. And then what you would prescribe is help them change those current state elements, once you've identified what they truly are, into an ideal state in the current setup that helps them prevent those potential negative impacts from coming true. So, whenever the mandate is lifted, you need to change their current, if it's a cold call that's the culprit, You need to change their cold calls in a way in the current state so when that mandate is lifted, they don't see any decline in their numbers. So it's all about the future event in this case scenario. The sixth type of problem, and I'm ranking these usually in the amount of negativity that people are going to see within these problems. The sixth type of problem is going to be a prescription-based problem. And this is how you can help people, is by understanding a prescription-based problem they're having. So a prescription-based problem essentially is they were having a problem, usually a symptom-based problem, and they tried to do something about it. And whatever they tried to do about it didn't work. So the problem was with the prescription, previous prescription. Doctors are more keyed on not only how well do they diagnose and prognose, but also when they prescribe, how effective was it in alleviating the problem? What you'll hear is people pissed off with their doctor if they gave them a medication that didn't solve their problem, you know? So this is a problem that comes by way of they had a previous, they tried to do something about a problem that they've had for quite a while. The previous plan didn't work. And so now they're trying to, again, solve for that problem that they were solving for in the beginning. So a great example would be an SDR leader came to me. They had recently purchased sales training from someone else. To try to solve for a pipeline problem. Their team was only at about roughly a little over 50% of quota. After the team was trained, for whatever reason, maybe it was adoption, I don't know, you know, that they still weren't seeing any increase in pipeline. They're still at like 54%. So this is a prescription-based problem. They were having the problem of their teams not hitting pipeline. They tried to do something about it, and it didn't work, again, for whatever reason. And so now they're coming to you to try to solve this problem. So what you're solving for is the original problem that they are incurring, you know, that they tried to solve through a different means. I would guess usually the reason that people have these problems is because the seller didn't do discovery. They didn't do everything we've been talking about. They didn't understand what their problem was. They didn't understand what the true root cause was. They didn't prescribe accordingly. So they gave them a piece of software, but they didn't understand what they were solving for. And so the person is still running into the problem. Our buyers want us to have their back. So prescription-based problem, these types of problems, they hurt my heart. Because our buyers are just trying to do their job better. And so should we, by understanding what their problem really is. You know, so it is your moral imperative in this case scenario to correctly identify what is causing the problem so that you nail the prescription. So the impact of this is their current symptoms. It's usually going to be a symptom-based problem, pain-based, persist, and even worse, because they've already tried to solve for it, meaning their pain has been going on for a while, been happening for a while. This can be negative. This is usually negative in the type of problem that it's going to be. It can be qualitative or quantitative, and the likelihood of inbounding is high or very high. You know, usually this is going to be someone, again, because it's pain-based, that they know is existing. They know the problem exists. Now they might not know the root cause or the prescription, that would solve for it, but this is going to be pain-based, so their likelihood of inbounding is going to be high. So prescription-based problems, the three things you need to identify is, number one, what was the prescription that they were previously prescribed? So my first question with this person, with this client was, what was the plan that was given to you? What did they tell you that you needed to be doing? They said X, Y, and Z. I said, okay, cool. The second thing that I need to know is what problem were they told that they have? So they told me, they're like, we're not hitting quota, 54% of quota. And we were told that our cold calls were the problem. That was the problem of why we weren't hitting quota. And what are the root causes that are causing the problem that they're having? What you need to challenge. You have to challenge, is the problem, is the culprit that the first person, the first seller who sold them whatever it was, had the wrong problem that they were solving for, or had the wrong prescription. It's only one of the two. So in some case scenarios, usually what you're going to find is that they had the wrong problem. Often it's going to be that they didn't identify the problem correctly that they were solving for. That the prescription, it's much easier to prescribe than it is to diagnose what the problem is, at least in my experience. So you need to understand, is it that they got the problem wrong, or is it that they got the prescription to the problem to solve the problem incorrect? So you have to challenge, was the original diagnosis correct, or was it a misdiagnosis? And are the symptoms persisting because the original diagnosis was wrong, or are the symptoms persisting because the original diagnosis was correct? It was their cold calls, but what they said to do about their cold calls didn't work. So I need to challenge all of that. And usually your buyer is going to be okay with you challenging this. Why? Because the problem is not with them. The problem is the first seller sold them a bag of goods. Either sold them the wrong bag of goods or sold them the wrong bag of goods for the problem that they were having. So what you need to diagnose, what is the problem that they're incurring based on the symptoms that they're telling you? They're like, hey, we're not hitting 54% of quota. So what is the culprit behind it? And was the original diagnosis a misdiagnosis, or was the original prescription one that couldn't solve for the problem? So again, usually what you're going to find is they were solving for the wrong problem, or they didn't even know what problem they were solving for. What you don't need to prognose anything. And the prescription is going to be that you need to prescribe a plan that eradicates the symptoms, the pains, the problems that they were having that weren't solved for with the original prescription. And please, for the love of Moses, nail it. This buyer is in pain. They tried to solve for it one time. And the political capital in this case is higher too, because they tried to solve for it the first time and it didn't work. So usually this is their last shot to solve it. So better nail it. No pressure. The seventh type of problem is going to be a lateral-based problem. And this is going to be an interesting type of problem where they were incurring a problem. They were given a solution for it. It solved that first problem, but it created a new one. Man, created a new one. So they had this first problem. Someone gave them a plan. They said, okay. And then it caused a new problem. I see this all the time in B2B SaaS. Specifically, calling us out. See this all the time. Even if the seller did find the problem. Great, here's your solution. But it caused like 3 new ones. So now, yeah, it did solve this original one. But now they got 3 new ones that they have to solve for. So like, I hope that we can feel for our buyers in this situation. So the example being a VP of sales, true story, bought sales training because they were like, I want to drive more pipeline. Their SDRs were 55% of quota, somewhere in there. The SDRs were booking more meetings as a result, but their AEs stopped self-prospecting because of it. So the net total actually for pipeline source went down because their SDRs started booking a couple more meetings, but their AEs laid off and they were booking on average 4. So they're like, cool, I got more pipeline. So they stopped self-prospecting. So all of a sudden, even though the SDRs went up 2 or 3, it caused their AEs to not self-prospect. So their overall pipeline total went down a meeting. So again, they were looking for a training that could not only help their SDRs book more pipeline, don't eradicate the original problem from being solved, but also they wanted a pipeline plan for their AEs as well. How can we get our AEs to self-prospect in tandem? What kind of KPI should we be after? Should they just have a different playbook? Should they have the same playbook but just less? So this was the problem that I was inherited with solving. I had the privilege of solving. was how do I get a methodology in place that the SDRs are using and also the AEs are using? So what you're solving for is you're trying to either eradicate the side effects without changing the positive result of the first problem being solved, or something that will solve the original problem but won't cause the side effect as well. So again, this is going to be based off of how many questions are you asking to your potential buyers. Give you an example. I'm allergic to penicillin. If I take penicillin, I break out in hives over my body for 15-minute segments, and then it will stop and it will change to a new location in my body for 4 days. If I take any penicillin. Hives, 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 hives. So if I had a problem and my doctor, for instance, prescribed me something that solves my first problem, but it has penicillin in it, they solved my first problem, but they created a fresh new 4-day hell for me. So if they can give me something that solves the original problem, solves the pipeline problem for the SDRs, but also incorporates an infrastructure for the AEs so that the VP of sales net sees the entire total go up, because you were solving for both. So the impact of this would be of not solving for it is that the side effects persist. They're typically going to be pain-based, and they're typically going to be with an increased level of aggression if you don't solve for them. It can be a negative or a positive problem, depends. And it can be qualitative or quantitative. The likelihood of inbounding is based on how severe is the side effect. So again, people are only going to solve a problem. It only becomes a problem, not a pain, when someone decides they're going to solve for it. They want or need to solve for it. So this is going to depend on how aggressive is the side effect according to their current setup. And in a lateral-based problem, you need to identify what was the original problem that was being solved for, what was the original prescription that they received to solve the original problem, and what are the new symptoms, pains, or problems that they're experiencing. So you need 3 things. What was the original problem, prescription they were given, prescribed plan, products, etc., services, and what are the new symptoms that they're experiencing as a result of adhering to that plan. If they've self-diagnosed, you need to self-diagnose that the new problems are a side effect of the original plan that was prescribed to them. So I need to know, were there AEs? Did they spike down truly because of the influx of meetings from the SDRs, or was it something else that happened to them? And if their diagnosis is not correct, so when that VP of sales came through the door and said, hey, we need a plan for both, if I realize actually your AE stopped self-prospecting, because their sales engagement instance was ripped away from them, or they have to put more information into the CRM than normal, so they stop self-prospecting because of that, not because the influx in pipeline. I need to challenge that if I believe that diagnosis is incorrect, that it's a misdiagnosis. So what to diagnose is what's causing the new problem, whether it's the original plan or not. And was it the original plan that's being prescribed that's causing it, or was it something else that's causing the new problem? And what you should prescribe is it's one of 2 things. It's either a plan that will eradicate the current side effect without redacting the positive outcome of the original problem being solved, or it could be something that solves the original problem but doesn't cause the side effect. So I can do one of either case scenarios in a lateral-based problem. Problem number 8. Now we're digging out into the more neutral and positive problems. So again, we got 11. Now this has been a long session. I'm having a blast, by the way. Number 8 is going to be a goal-based problem. So a goal-based problem, think of it like a math problem. It's a neutral problem. This is something that I'm solving for, not solving. And there's a difference. Solving means I'm incurring a negative impact, or I'm afraid I will, so I need to solve for it. Solving for means I need to arrange things in my current state in a way to hit this thing. And if I don't hit this thing, then the negative crap happens to me. So solve for why, not solve why. A neutral problem is going to be goal-based. They have a goal in mind. usually it's a metric, and they need to arrange things within their current state to achieve that goal, to hit that goal, to arrange things within their current state in a way that that goal will be achieved. So the flip the script example would be, so there's no negative impact yet. So flip the script example would be, and this truly happened, SDR leader comes in and they're building a program from the ground up, meaning they have no reps, there's no negative impact yet, and they're trying to solve for their reps hitting 10 meetings per month. So they want training to be a part of that. They want me to be a part of the build process. So again, there's no negative impact yet. They're just solving for, they need to arrange things, the tools, elements, etc., within their current setup in a way that will yield these their reps to hit 10 meetings, and they want training to be a part of that. So what they're solving for is how to arrange those things within their current state to achieve the current goal. And the impact of not solving this problem is they don't achieve their current goal. So their goal, again, is usually going to be a metric-based problem. Some type of metric that they're looking to drive. And if they don't arrange things within their current state, then the outcome or the impact would be is they don't achieve their goal and they will get some negative impact on the back end usually. So this is slightly negative to neutral, and this is typically going to be quantitative. Goals are usually going to be quantitative. And the likelihood of inbounding is going to be medium because they don't have a negative impact yet. So proximity to negative impact is going to change some things. So what you need to identify for them is what is the goal that they have in mind. And if they self-prescribe what they think the plan should be to achieve that goal, I would challenge if whatever they've picked, product, services, plan, is sales training the thing that's going to get them there. They think that sales training will help their reps hit 10 meetings per month. Do I think that sales training and cold call training in specific is going to help them hit that goal? You don't need to diagnose anything or prognose anything. You don't need to forecast anything for them. But the prescription is a plan. And it's a plan. Your products, your services is a part of that will help them achieve their goal. So this is more of a neutral problem. Again, solve for why. They have a metric. There's no negative impact yet. And they're just trying to arrange things within their current state to achieve the goal at hand. Number 9. Now we're getting into some of the softer problems. So usually you're going to see, I digress. These are some of the more positive impact problems. So number 9 is an amelioration-based problem. So this is going to be a problem that comes by in the terms of a prospect just wants to make something better or improve something about their current state. And it's going to be usually qualitative in nature. And the characteristic of this type of problem is their main metric, whatever that is. So like business owners, for instance, it would be revenue that they're making is their main metric. A SDR leader, it's going to be booked meetings. A sales leader, it's going to be quota attainment. A CRO, it's going to be revenue. CSM, it's going to be, NPS score, or there's always one main metric. They're hitting their current metric, but they want to make something still about their day better or improve the condition of it. So this will usually come by way of the prospect recognizes something and they just want to make it better because it bugs them. And I'll give you an example in my own case scenario. I was an SDR leader at a company, pretty well-known company, and I was hitting my current metric, my outbound metric as an SDR leader. No big deal. That actually sounds really arrogant now that I think about it. We were hitting our current outbound metric. But I noticed that the inbound leads are coming through, meaning the people who are raising their hands and saying like, hey, I want to talk to you about your product. The process was clunky. As like, it takes days for them to get a response. Then they're having to jump on a 15-minute awful band call, where they're asked all these questions. I'm like, it just bothered me that I'm like, this isn't it's not a good way to treat prospects. They want to schedule now. So how can we find a process that's going to take better care of them and cause more conversion, which inherently, that's why one of the assets in written was how to drive 70% more conversion. That's what we ended up doing. I bought a piece of software to do this, and I said, this is exactly how I want to use that piece of software. Is Chili Piper. Shout out Chili Piper, amazing calendaring tool. So I leveraged Chili Piper to all of a sudden drive 70% more conversion of inbound leads. I wasn't measured on inbound leads. I wasn't metriced that way. I wasn't paid out to make inbound leads better, but it just bothered me. I'm like, this is not something, my current metric was being hit. It wasn't about my current metric. It was about there was something that I believed that we could do better. So this type of problem, the prospect recognizes that there's a better way of doing things. And this usually has to be recognized by the prospect, because if you go to someone and challenge them saying like I was hitting my metric, I was hitting my outbound metric, but there was a better way from my perspective of doing it. So this is usually going to be realized by your prospect. So I gave the example of, this is an example that happened from the inbound perspective for me. The SDR leading was hitting their current KPIs, was hitting their quota, was completely fine, but they wanted to talk about sales training because they were hitting their entire quota over cold calls. And they were like, we send a lot of emails per day. So I feel like, why don't we talk about, the emails were just bugging this person of the emails just didn't seem high quality to him, even though they were completely hitting their goals. So he's like, I just feel like we should make our emails better. So what they're solving for is to better or improve the current state. So in my case scenario, I was just trying to make the inbound process better because it was bothering me, even though I was hitting my current goal. So the impact of not solving this problem, essentially, and this is going to sound crazy, but I've stress tested this a number of times, even on Keenan himself. Basically, your prospect's just bothered. You're bothered that you aren't doing things in the way that you know that you could do them. You know that it's not the best place that you could be. And they wonder, I wonder what this is causing to me. But that's not what they're solving for. I wasn't solving to make inbound lead conversion go up using Chili Piper. What I was solving for is that the inbound process just seemed bad, right? Now, what we got as a result of that was an increase in inbound conversion. But that wasn't the pith. That wasn't what I was after. So in this case scenario, typically your prospect just continues to be bothered, but they wonder, I wonder how this is impacting our conversion. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know if it does damage our conversion, but I'm guessing that it does, so they will wonder about that if they don't solve the problem. So the negative, it's neutral to slightly positive. It's typically going to be qualitative, but not quantitative in nature. And this is going to be medium or high likelihood of inbounding. So an amelioration-based problem, you're trying to understand first and foremost, identify what are the current state elements that the person thinks are bad. They have some elements in their head, and they're usually qualitative. What do you think is bad? My inbound process. Or what do you think should be improved? The quality of our emails. The second thing you need to identify is what do they mean by bad first? And what would they take as evidence that it's better? So this is going to be, again, qualitative in nature, right? So I would want to understand if someone said, I just want to make my emails better, or I just want to make my inbound process better, what would I take as the prospect as acceptable evidence that it had been improved? So what is the acceptable? They say, we want to make our emails bad, and I stress test it, and I'm like, okay, they're hitting their KPIs. It's just bothering them how they're sending emails. What's the acceptable? What do they mean by bad? And what would they take as, how would it be relieving if they had these three things, of what's better? And they'll usually say if they were more personalized, I would take that as better. If they were getting this type of response from my prospect, of prospects thanking them for the personalization in terms of outreach, that would mean to me it's better. But that's what you really need to identify when selling this way to this type of problem. You need to challenge them first. You should challenge them on if what they think is bad is truly bad based on your perspective. And I'll give you an example. I've had people come in and they say, our emails are bad. We just want to make them better. I challenge, double down. And if they're not missing their metric, I'm like, what's leading you to believe that? I don't know. I just feel like we could do better. There's no potential threat they're trying to avoid. And I'm like, okay, so show me the email. I'll look at the email and I'll say, there's certainly some room for improvement. I'm thinking one person in specific, but I said, I don't know if this is going to help you or this is going to hurt you. On average, this is what I would call an 8. I watch the prospect's face implode. Like, this is actually an 8 from what I typically see in the industry. More than happy to help you. If you say them not personalizing is a problem for you, I believe it. That's what we're solving for. Remember, what do you need to solve, or what do you need to solve for? I need to make it better. This person just feels bad about it. More than happy to solve for it. But just so you know, according to normal emails that I'm seeing, this is actually pretty good. And you, again, this session is how to help them. When your goal is to help them, your actions change. If your goal wasn't to help them, then you wouldn't do that. You'd say, okay, great, I'll sell you sales training. They want to make it better, right? But every step of the way should be a communication. From my perspective, I hear that we want to change sales. I'm like, into what? Helping your buyer, right? So this is something that would help your buyer. Hey, I'm still happy to sell this to you. You want to make something better? Totally fine. This is actually pretty good. That case scenario, I cannot tell you the amount of times where the person still tries to buy. Because now you've just told them, like, hey, this actually, you're not too bad. When you tell them the truth, when it's to the impairment of you being able to sell, you instantly gain trust with them, that you're telling the truth, because you just told them something negative to your outcome. And this can only come as a result, instinctually, if your agenda truly is to help your buyer. Then this stuff will come as the outflow, naturally. And when you do this, again, in the long term, and usually in the short term, this will help you sell more. So at any rate, I would challenge them, if you think that the current state elements are bad based on what you've seen, if they self-diagnose what they think is causing the current state element, what was causing the inbound process to be bad, then I would challenge whether that's a correct diagnosis or a misdiagnosis. And if they self-diagnose the problem correctly and they self-prescribed a solution, you got to challenge if their prescription is correct. So again, when you're challenging your buyer, it's not because you love doing it. It's because you love them. Because you love taking care of them in terms of what the reality is today. So what to diagnose, what is causing the current state elements to be bad, what's causing the inbound process to be clunky, what do I mean by clunky, and is there anything additional that's happening to them because that you think is negatively harming them because of the poor quality of these current state items. So there might be another potential impact of, like, yes, they're hitting their quota, but the people who, I think about this a lot, people will say this on LinkedIn, or they're like, oh, Becc, you got 200 likes to this post. I'm like, okay, thanks. But here's the thing, 20,000 people saw it. So what do the other 19,800 people think? There might be an opportunity cost. So if you think that there's a negative impact that's happening to them, even though they're hitting their current KPI, that you think is happening because of this poor quality of whatever, then I would diagnose that for them. and I would prognose if there's any other additional negative impact that may happen to them, not as a result of not changing the current state elements that they aren't aware of. So having your buyers back is by knowing the information that they don't know that could hurt them. So the prescription is just simply put, improve the current state elements that they think aren't good or are bad, improving those current state elements. And you have to improve them according to the evidence that they said was acceptable. So if my prospect says, I want to make my cold calls better because they're bad, and I'm the seller that's like, cool, well, I'll swipe the card. You don't know what they think is bad. So you don't know what to improve. And you also don't know what they would see that would relieve them. So I've heard a lot when people come in, and when I ask these questions, they say like, what I mean by bad is they're just not personalized and they just seem mass blasty. And I'm like, cool. So how many emails from a percentage perspective would you say like you would take as acceptable? What would you take? What would make you comfortable as a communication that your SDRs did know their buyer? Is it personalization? Is it trigger-based relevance? What would you take as evidence? And when I'm being ferocious about this, I'm being ferocious for my prospect. It's not necessarily always comfortable to ask these questions, but I want to see what they're after solving, because if I make their calls better to what I think is better, or their emails better to what I think is better, is I'm like, their emails are more brief now because of the training, but they wanted their emails to be more personalized because of a training, then I didn't solve their problem. I made it better to what I thought was better, or improved what I thought was bad. But in this type of problem, you always need to be after the information behind the curtain. The 10th type of problem, we got one more and then we're going to close out. The 10th type of problem is an opportunity-based problem. So this is a positive problem by nature, where the problem that they're trying to solve, again, you can solve a negative or you can solve for to incur an impact. So this type of problem, they're trying to solve for something in their current state, to rearrange things in their current state, to inherit or achieve an opportunity that they think is in front of them. So in this type of marquee problem, they're hitting their goals. They're hitting their goals, but they're like, yo, I see an opportunity that's on the horizon here that I think that I can get to. So the example here would be SDR teams hitting quota currently. They're exceeding their targets. This case scenario, they were booking every single one of their calls, their discovery meetings over cold call. And they weren't booking any. It was bizarre. So bizarre to see. I usually see the opposite. They weren't booking any over email. I said, how many emails are you sending? They said 100. So he said, I'll never forget this. His thought pattern was, okay, keep the cold calls as is. If I could get like 1 or 2 meetings over email, I'm going to outrun my quota even further. So an opportunity-based problem is hallmarked by they're hitting their normal metrics, whatever those metrics are, but they see an additional opportunity, a positive problem to solve for a positive impact in front of them that they want to achieve, that they believe is out there. So they wanted to evaluate SDR training because they're like, if I can get email up, all of a sudden then I'm going to blow out quota even more. So the problem they're trying to solve for is to rearrange their current state in a way that helps them obtain or realize the potential opportunity that they see in front of them. So the impact of not solving this problem essentially is the prospect doesn't obtain the opportunity. Not a, quote unquote, big deal necessarily. It depends on the level of impact. So this is a positive problem, qualitative or quantitative. It can be both. And the likelihood of inbounding is going to be high in this case scenario. So the things you need to identify is you need to identify what is the opportunity that they believe that they have on the horizon. And what you need to challenge if they've self-diagnosed that they're like, okay, So we need to book more meetings over email because we're sending 100, even though we're hitting our quote on cold calls. We think that it's the email buyer persona value prop, for instance, that is holding us back from getting some meetings over email and getting that opportunity. I have to challenge whether it truly is the buyer persona value prop, or whether I think like, hey, this is actually good. It's really your subject lines that's killing you. So again, this is hallmarked by they're already seeing success according to their normal metrics, but they see an opportunity that they could get in front of them if they rearrange something in their current state. So you should challenge if you think that what they have identified as the element that they need to change to realize the opportunity is correct or not. And if they self-diagnose that correctly, and they've also self-prescribed a plan of how to do it, you need to challenge accordingly. If you believe that the plan that they have said, of how they're going to change that element is incorrect, you need to challenge that the way that they're thinking about it is not going to get them to their goal. So this is what the best sellers do. An example being, I went into the woman who cuts my hair a few years back. And I said, hey, I want to dye my hair darker. She said, tell me what look you're going after. I said, I want to dye it black. She said, tell me what look you're going after. And I said, well, I really like it when, my features of my face are a little bit more highlighted because of the darkness of my hair around it. So I want black. She said, actually, you don't need black. You need dark brown. And here's why. The black is going to wash out your face. And it's actually going to combat the exact thing that you're saying that you're trying to drive. I didn't listen to her. I was like, I still want black. We dyed it black. I started crying. We had to bleach it back to lighter brown. Now, she told me her thoughts. That is your responsibility. She said, this won't get you to your goal. I'll dye your hair black. Based on my expertise, this will not get you to your goal. I didn't listen to her. Now I do. But it is still your responsibility as a seller to tell them and challenge what they say they think they need. They're coming to you because this isn't their expertise. So you need to challenge, even when they say they need something, why do they say they need that thing? So that you can help them achieve the goal. So in this case, it's going to be an opportunity. But in all cases, you need to challenge that when they say they need something, do they actually need that thing? So what to diagnose, or what are the current estate elements that would hold them back from realizing the opportunity? And the prescription is just a plan that will ultimately help them obtain that opportunity that's right in front of them. And the last problem is going to be a success-based problem. So this one's kind of a fun one. This is a problem that comes as a result of someone being successful. So this is the type of problem that's a dream problem to have, so to speak, because you're having so much success that it causes an issues in another problem. So a great example would be, I saw a marketing team once that was extremely successful. And keep in mind, I was involved because of sales training, but they said like, hey, our marketing team has been killing it so much that the amount of demo requests and MQLs that are coming through here is so high that we don't have enough headcount to just take orders. Pretty dreamy, right? All the account executives are like started booing at the screen and probably logged off the session. But they said like, hey, so we need some type of consulting process of how do we rearrange within our current state headcount. They're like, we're trying to hire as aggressively as possible, but we're just churning users in the meantime. So they said I want to maintain conversion, but I've got to figure out a way to do this faster before I can hire some more people. So they said, we want to hire you as a consultant on how we can do this from a process perspective more quickly and effectively. So if we only have the same 10 people that we have today, how can we do it in a better, faster, more effective way? So that even using this 10 people, we can make a bigger impact on all the demo requests that we had. Again, dreamy case scenario, but this is going to be the last type of problem. It's a problem that is based on an overwhelming amount of success that you've had, and it issues in a new set of conditions to solve for. So to solve the problem, you essentially, what you're trying to solve for is to get the prospect to avoid whatever thing that they're running into currently without eradicating their current success. And the impact of not solving is either a lost emotional, lost opportunity. And they, in this case scenario specifically, they felt like even though they were winning, from the SDR perspective, they're like, we're winning, because we're booking so many meetings from these MQLs. They felt like bad stewards. They felt like, someone else could do more with the current state. So this is going to be a positive type problem, both qualitative and quantitative, and the likelihood of inbounding is medium to high. And what you need to identify is what the success that they've had that is causing the problem that they're currently running into. What is the problem they're experiencing or looking to solve? So it could be a negative problem or it could be a neutral problem. And if they've self-diagnosed, of course, you have to, of what is causing, essentially like what was the problem in their inbound process that it was causing them to spend too much time on these demo requests that they weren't able to translate enough. If they've self-diagnosed that, you always owe it to them to challenge that diagnosis. Is it correct or is it not correct? If it is incorrect, then you need to tell them and update them that it's a misdiagnosis. It's actually not your inbound process. It's actually this other thing that's causing it. And if they've self-diagnosed correctly and they've self-prescribed, you also need to challenge that their prescription is correct, their self-prescription. So triple, mark, underscore, etc., that people diagnose because they've had to, right? And they self-diagnose incorrectly all the time because that's not their expertise. This is how to build credibility, but this is how to help your buyer win. So what to diagnose, what's causing the symptoms, or what are the things that they want to change in the current state to make things better. And if they, and for prognosing, if they're trying to just eradicate a negative symptom, there is no prognosis. But if they're trying to make some current state elements better, a better inbound process, a better, experience or user journey for their inbound prospects, then I would, are there any other impacts that they could be incurring because they're not making those current state elements better is what I would prognose. And then the prescription is just a plan that will eradicate the symptoms they're experiencing due to the success that they're having, way to go them, or to solve the problem, the neutral problems that they're currently incurring. So the plan is always should include what, if they should use your products, what products or services they should use, where they should use them, when they should use them, how they should use them, and what use case scenario. But this is going to be a problem, great problem to have. It's based on the current success, overwhelming success of their main metrics or KPIs. So in summary, that was a lot of meat. There are 4 agendas, whether we want to have them or not. We either have the agenda of selling them. The way that we get there is we pretend to be more human or more relatable or more likable or to, have sympathy for them, etc., so we can get them to open up, but our agenda is still to sell. That's negative. It's negative. Can cause a little more conversion, but it's negative long term. And I'd argue short term too. We have agenda 2. That I just want to sell more, so I'm going to be super aggressive. I'm going to hammer them with follow-up emails, and I'm going to try and schmooze them with tickets. Again, the agenda is still to sell, so I'd say it's negative still. We have agenda 3, that my agenda is to book more meetings. It's the same as 2, it's just from the pipeline perspective. My agenda is me to make myself successful. An agenda 1, an agenda 2, and agenda 3. My main core agenda is to sell because I want to take care of me. And the 4th type of agenda, which is the only agenda that will help our buyers and our conversion because of it, is that my agenda isn't to help me. My agenda is to help them. And this opens up a wonderful opportunity for us. The opportunity to have their back, the opportunity to improve their current state, to improve their world. And so they'll thank you as a result of selling to them. So there is a wonderful world of opportunity, of problems that we can uncover for them, that we can diagnose for them, and that we can, help them understand that there is a consideration to be had here, or something that they're going to run into. And I think that sneakily what you'll find is when you do this, when you're after helping your buyer, when you do have them top of mind, the sales will come in the meantime. You don't have to worry about that. So I just encourage everyone out there that there is a wonderful world of all the problems you can solve for your buyer. And it starts with having the core agenda of helping them. So that's everything. Thanks for tuning in. So I know that session was very short, just kidding, but that is everything. Thank you so much for watching. I had a absolute blast. If you like this session and you want to hear more, if you go to flipthescript.co, and I have a lot of different sessions on all kinds of things tactical and everything related to sales. And if you really like this session, if you tag me and Flip the Script on LinkedIn and give us your feedback on this session and what you'd like to hear more of. But either way, thank you for tuning in and staying along at each step of the way. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.